I think we should talk about stereotypes since it keeps coming up in internal conversation.
Yep.
And then I went to ChatGPT and I said, what are typical stereotypes of the betrayed spouse and the unfaithful spouse?
Ooh. What does it offer?
Oh, dude. These are so you.
Go on.
Actually, I don't have enough intel to tell you that. You'll have to tell me whether you fit these. The betrayed spouse is naive or blind.
Oh,
are you blind?
A little bit harsh.
Oh,
naive. Do you know what? I think I was naive at one point. Yeah. No, actually, no. I'm not going to stand by that. I think that you feel naive because it seems the perception is that you've had the wool pulled over your eyes. Like it was all there. It was all there to see, but you didn't see it. So you must be stupid. You must be an idiot. Like, why couldn't you see it? It was obvious.
It was obvious.
Yeah? And yet because for me, it also felt obvious as well. But yet I was in like a sort of denial because.
Were you more ideal back then?
More ideal?
Idealism. Did you have a lot of idealism built into your world as far as what the world should
look like? I don't think so.
I think I fit more of the
maybe a little bit. Okay. Say that again, sorry.
I said, I think I fit more of the betrayed spouse stereotypes.
Oh, really?
Oh, abso-fucking-lutely. I don't think that I fit the unfaithful stereotype at all.
I'm looking forward to this. Okay, so let's just finalize the naive. So yes, I think I definitely felt naive.
ChatGPT says that the betrayed spouse stereotypically is naive or blind, a victim or a martyr, overly dependent, vengeful or bitter.
Oh, God.
Emotionally devastated.
Mm-hmm.
Now, ChatGPT says stereotypically unfaithful spouses are selfish or immoral, a thrill seeker or lustful, unhappy or neglected, commitment phobic, and a master manipulator. I think that's the only one that I lived in fear of being. And then come to find out, like, it wasn't true.
The last one?
Yeah.
I think most people are master manipulators.
Luke, what do you think is true of the stereotypes? Because you and I, when we were going back and forth, you were like, Chelsea, I know you hate stereotypes, but 80% of the time they're true. Now, are you the 80 or the 20?
In terms of the betrayed spouse?
In terms of the stereotypes that you fit.
Well, the ones that you listed out are for the betrayed spouse. I think at least some point I fitted all of them.
Really?
Yeah, at some point.
What a human.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, constantly changing, evolving.
Constantly changing, like a chameleon.
Mm-hmm.
And I think...
Go ahead.
I mean, we evolve. Like, that's part of being human.
Yeah.
We adapt to our surroundings. We're actually surprisingly good at it. It's just that we're usually quite resistant. If you put that wall down and step into the next thing, guess what? We tend to figure it out pretty quickly.
Totally.
You know, people get stuck because they don't want change and they're fearful of change. That's why we end up in jobs for years and years that we hate because we can't stand our boss, but yet we still stay there because it pays the bills. But then something happens. Maybe we become injured. Maybe we become unwell. Maybe we become unemployed through redundancy. And it's then that then gives you enough of a kick to do something about it. But you had the capacity to do that the whole time. You were just too chicken to do it.
Yeah, so the universe forced you into it.
We may have different views on that.
Otherwise, you're not going to be able to pay the bills, right?
Yeah.
When it says the naive or blind, I don't know how a betrayed spouse could actually fit that stereotype if the unfaithful is actively trying to eliminate any possibility of them finding out. I don't think that makes you naive or blind. I think that just makes you unaware of information, right?
To an extent. So it really does depend on, I think it does depend on the unfaithful spouse in that case. So some people really are very good at hiding things, and some people are less aware than others. Certainly for me, I was definitely aware, and I raised that awareness, but I was told quite convincingly that there was nothing to worry about. That
How was it convincing?
It felt convincing at the time. And as I reflect back on that, I now see it more as deflection. But at the time, it was what I wanted to hear.
Oh.
I didn't want my relationship to end. I didn't want my marriage to end. I didn't want to believe that my wife was having an affair with one of my friends.
Do you think that you wanted to be convinced and that's why you were convinced?
No, I think I was convinced. I think I thought it was happening was because I trust my own gut. But then what I was hearing was going against it, and I was choosing to trust her and I was choosing to trust him. But yet, this is where maybe the naivety came in, is my gut was right the whole time, that this situation was not what it was perceived to be. And I didn't trust my gut. So if I was going to call myself naive at all, it was because I chose to ignore my own intuition.
Do you think that your intuition tells you about yourself, or does it tell you about other people?
Probably a little bit of both. And now, I mean, my interpretation of intuition, what intuition and gut feeling means to me, you probably won't like this, but
What do we want?
My perspective on intuition is, as we go through the world, we gather insane amounts of data. In fact, I remember, I'm going to throw numbers. I'm going to make these numbers up a little bit, if I'm honest, because I can't remember them.
I love
But it's something like, we take in something like 11 gigabits of data per second or per minute or again, don't quote me on the numbers, but it's a lot of information coming in all the time through sound, through sight, through temperature and touch and feel and all the things. But we can only actually process something like, I don't know, again, I can't remember the number, but it's like 0.1% of that at any given time. It's a really small amount compared to the amount of information that's coming in. And when I say process, like consciously, like actively aware of what's going on. That's why our brains are so good at filtering out so much. We have this reticular activating system, which literally filters out all of the stuff that's not useful, keeps us focused on the things that are of use, or at least it thinks of use. However, it doesn't mean that information is not going in. So we pick up on things. We pick up on behavioral changes. We notice slight little patterns and things that differ in our surroundings, and particularly with people that we've spent a lot of time with, and we've become really good at predicting their behavior. Like, slight sidetrack, but I think that a lot of people think that they really know their partners, particularly if they've been together for a long time. It's almost like the longer they've been together, the better they know their partner. I don't think that's true. I think that people get to know their partner's behavior. They don't understand really what it is that they're thinking, what their motivations are, what their deep desires. And I don't believe that anybody ever really gets to that. I know that because I have my own, and I don't communicate all of them with other people. Like, you'll get some of them. My partner will get some of them. Sometimes when I'm on a call with Anne-Marie, she'll get some of them, but nobody gets all of them. And there's still some that are filtered through perception. So I think intuition is essentially us taking in all of this information all the time, and then it's leaving an emotional imprint. It's having something that's going on below the conscious level. It's much more subconscious. And then when something happens, it makes itself present, but it's such a blurred message that we can't really make sense of it, or it's so easy to dismiss.
Yeah.
But if we really pay attention to it, we really drop into our body and we truly ask what it is that we're feeling and start to explore why that might be, it's very rare that we can't find the answer.
Was your intuition pretty strong before everything?
It always has. Oh,
God, when did you get a good intuition?
I've always trusted my sense about people, and maybe it's been a bit delusional at times, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying I'm always right.
Dude, delusion is the way.
But I choose to trust it. I feel like I've got enough evidence for myself. And plus, why not? I don't like the thought of not trusting it, to be honest.
Totally. I feel like I didn't really get acquainted with my intuition until I allowed myself to feel feelings. Were you encouraged in childhood to feel your feelings?
It's interesting. I can't definitively say either way. As I've shared before, my dad left when I was 4, and I was surrounded entirely by women, really. I mean, obviously, my dad was still, I'd still see my dad, but it would only be initially every 2 weeks, and then that became once a month, and then eventually it became every couple of months, and then he moved overseas, and it was once or twice a year as the years went by. So I didn't really have what I would define as that kind of like masculine father figure. I suppose one of my friends' dads did play that role a bit, but not quite the same way. But I was predominantly surrounded by women. There's my mum, there's my sister, and my grandmother, the most prominent things. I always got on really well with women as well, and girls, just generally speaking. I was always very easy to communicate, well, with both sexes, to be fair, but I always found it very easy to communicate with girls. And so I think that has had some like underlying influence over time. I wouldn't say that it was like an active, there, it's okay to feel what you're feeling. There was that definitive.
Was there ever any instances of you shouldn't feel that way? Don't feel that way. You should feel this way? Or not really?
No, but not in a really obvious, conscious way, at least not from my family directly. But to say that didn't happen in society or not, I don't know. I'm sure I saw that externally a lot, and I saw it in other people. I don't think I really felt that at home. I think I always felt very safe at home. Like it was a place that I've loved that sense of home, which is why I still essentially live in the same area, because home's always been a really key feeling for me. And it's just a feeling, but it's one that I like. So why change it?
That's so interesting, because I consider my own body home. I've changed houses so many times. In the last year alone, I've lived in, I think, 3 different places. And so I finally resigned myself to, okay, my body's home. The end. Yes. Actually, I just want to know which one of these stands out to you the most as possibly true for you. Victim or martyr, overly dependent, vengeful or bitter, emotionally devastated. Which one?
Okay, that's hard to pick all. I feel there's very small amounts of all, different times. So first one was the victim. No, what was the first one? Sorry?
Victim or martyr. Seen as helpless, blameless. Wow. Seen as helpless, blameless, or trapped in the situation. Expected to take the moral high ground and endure the emotional fallout.
Yep. Definitely.
That was true for you?
Oh, yeah, without doubt. To begin with. In fact, I really recognized a sense of, like, it's okay because I'm not the one that did anything wrong. Like, I could live in peace with that. And I definitely remember really feeling that. And it really helped me, in all honesty, to begin with. And I didn't throw it at. I didn't feel like I was like, oh, maybe I did right at the beginning. Maybe whilst we're still living together and it was all still very volatile and emotional and turmoil. And I'm sure I will have said and done things then that maybe came from that place. But it didn't last long. And it definitely helped me to be able to reflect back and think, and maybe it was from a slightly misguided perspective, although I still technically agree with it. The fact that my wife had an affair actually had nothing to do with me. She didn't do it to me. She did it for her. But at the time, I was like, if I haven't like definitively done anything wrong, like she was telling me that I was a great husband and a great father and all these things, but she just didn't love me anymore. She wasn't in love with me anymore. What I was hearing was validating for what my own experience was as well. Because I also thought I'd been a pretty good husband. I'm not saying, no, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying I was faultless. I had flaws as a human being. I'm human. But I didn't think I was bad at what I was doing. And I really valued my role. And I loved being a husband. And I loved being that family man and the father and the home. I loved that. I really embodied that. And I didn't feel that was forced upon me. It was something that I actively embraced and really enjoyed. And in many ways, I grieved that probably more than I grieved her. Specifically, like it was the whole thing. It was the identity. I'm not saying I didn't grieve her. Of course I did, but there was much more to it than that. It didn't feel like it was just
the past reality. I was just on a coaching call talking to a guy about this. I was like, a lot of people think that grief only comes in the wake of death. And I think it comes in the death of futures that we were really looking forward to, or ideas that we had inside of our head. And yeah, I think it's the grieving process that ultimately holds a lot of people back when they encounter infidelity. and knowing how to grieve when nobody really talks about it, or at least when they talk about it, it's very much like melancholy-esque. And I don't do the melancholy approach. I do very much a creative approach to grief. But yeah, I think you're hitting on it. It's grieving a past reality and a future that you were looking forward to very much. Okay, I want to ask
that's a really
you.
interesting point, because you do think of grieving as being this thing that has already happened.
Oh yeah,
But you absolutely
definitely.
can grieve
I
something
found
that hasn't happened
myself grieving a past that didn't even exist. I went to put my Christmas decorations up and I was like, damn, I'm so tired. I wish I wasn't doing this alone. I was like, oh, wait, I did it alone the last 13 years. I was sitting there holding this space for grief for this life that I had been living that didn't exist. Because I was like, no, this is the exact same reality that I was in. I just changed locations. And now I'm feeling sad about it.
And you're hitting on the piece that I was on another call this week with one of my favorite male clients, and he had said, what I realized, because he had a first new experience of Christmas with a new partner. He's outside of the air dynamic. And he was like, what I realized was all of the past Christmases, all I was doing was looking at Christmases long ago and thinking that the joyful experience of Christmas was always going to be behind me. So during Christmas and all of the events, he would just be looking at his phone, looking at the past, instead of actually having an experience or securing an experience that he really wanted for himself during the Christmas season. So fuck yeah, Anne-Marie.
Yeah.
Okay, I want to see if these ones are true for you.
Really
overly
on point.
dependent. Were you overly dependent? They're believed to rely too much on the unfaithful spouse emotionally or financially.
No, not particularly, no.
Okay.
No, that doesn't really fade me. I think probably as much just because of the dynamic of us as a couple.
I feel like a lot of the wayward spouses that I talk to, this feels very true for them about their particular
Their
partner.
betrayed spouse.
Yeah. And they have tons of evidence to back it up. So that validates your claim that stereotypes are true. And I have multiple reference points now in my reality.
You're welcome.
But like also that stereotype, I mean, I can see how it can be true because the demise of a relationship, I think, is founded in a lack of reciprocity. And if there isn't the balance and harmony of emotional and financial reliance and having clarity about that among each other, it leads to burnout.
Of course it does.
Yeah. Okay, this
Yeah.
one. I can't imagine you as this one, but I really want to fucking find out if this is true for you. Vengeful or bitter? You were depicted as someone who will focus on retaliation or remain stuck in anger.
Yes and no. I mean, did I feel vengeful and bitter? Yes. Yeah, for definite. Of course I did. I wanted to kill the bastard. You know?
Oh my God, I want to meet that guy.
Yeah, me too. Oh, what? No, what? Him? I mean, this one, or the one that I wanted to kill.
You. I want to meet that guy who was vengeful and bitter.
Yeah, but
not anymore.
And in all honesty, it's funny. I was talking to one of my friends just yesterday, actually, yesterday or day before, anyway, a couple of days ago, and he was telling me about this experience. We were talking. He's got young kids, similar sort of age to mine, and he had this memory of this event when he was out in the park. And this guy comes by, so he's out of the park. His son was 2 years old at the time. And this guy comes flying by on a bike, kind of push bike, and knocks into his kid. And my friend's kid goes flying. Mm-hmm. And this guy doesn't stop. And my friend calls to him and say, "Oi," like something like that. And the guy turns around and says, "He should have moved out the bloody way," or something to that effect. This is a 2-year-old kiddie story. My friend saw like the full red, and my friend is not a guy you mess with either, so he absolutely stormed. He just saw red. He saw there was this woman nearby. He says, can you just watch my son? He goes, and he stormed after this guy, like absolute, like enraged, and he caught up with him. Like this guy was on a push bike, and he managed to catch up with him and shoved him and threw him into this ditch. And anyway, he thought he killed him because of the impact, and then just turned around and went back to his son. And anyway, he said it turns out that the guy was okay, and he got up and scurried off and all the things. But the point is, I recognized that in me particularly when I think about my children, like if something were to happen and I was to witness, there is something inside me, as whether it's just as a father, as a man, I don't know, or just as a parent, I'm not really sure, that is just overwhelmingly powerful. There is nothing that would stop me.
The protector
Nothing.
becomes the predator in you.
It's just so, I feel it, like really feel it. Even just talking about it, I can feel it. And it's scary because you don't know what you would do if it's in that moment. And I remember feeling similar to that at times shortly after. Given the vicinity of the affair partner, he lived literally 200 yards from the house. And I would see him quite regularly thereafter. In fact, I still do. And the temptation, if I was driving to go around and see the kids and I saw him walking down the road or running down the road, the temptation to swerve and just flatten him was, I cannot get over how powerful that desire was. And the only thing, honestly, the only thing in that moment that stopped me was my children, was because I knew the consequences of that. And then their parent, my kids really wouldn't have a present dad because he'd be in
You
prison.
think consequences stopped you?
No, definitely. Definitely.
We're going to have another episode about that.
Yeah. Now, not everybody, maybe that's just, I feel like I have pretty good control of my emotion, particularly under difficult circumstances. I can experience very difficult things and I don't necessarily react. And I don't mean I'm suppressing them or burying them. I'm just considered, generally speaking, particularly in difficult situations. I think it's why I'm quite good in conflict. But like in those moments, it's like all of that goes out the window and it's much more primal. Yeah. And it's talking about that distance between stimulus and response. And I suppose luckily enough for me, reflecting back, there was just enough time for me to be able to catch myself and not swerve and not act out the things that I really wanted to in that moment. But in terms of my desire, hell yeah, it was there and it was strong. But it was much more towards him than her.
It was towards him?
Yeah. And again, I recognize now, I didn't at the time really.
Please tell me what it was.
So at the time, I thought it was because I could understand her position. I recognized the time that she was spending with him, and as that relationship was evolving in its way, it was just something separate. It was something that was unique for her. It was something that was independent of what was going on at home. It was just...
Was he like the kind of safe space where you could channel that rage?
I think so. I think it was because I recognized that if I channeled that same level of rage at home, it would have really impacted our ability to effectively co-parent.
The consequences stopped you?
Sorry?
The consequences stopped you?
Yeah.
Damn.
So it's interesting because it worked both ways. I'm going to have
to start putting some consequences around my household. Shit.
But I work with people who are not so good at managing those moments.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I work with them too.
I know some of those.
Yeah.
Okay, let's see if this one was true for you. And I texted you the unfaithful spouse ones. Okay. Emotionally devastated, stereotyped as unable to recover or move forward from the betrayal.
Obviously, we know that unable to recover and move forward isn't true for me. But there was a time when I thought it was. There was a time when I couldn't really see a way forward. And it's difficult to say how long that lasted. I can't really remember exactly because it wasn't just a case of it was there and then the next day it wasn't. It was a more gradual process. But I can definitely recognize how you could easily stay stuck in that situation.
Okay, so you know what? I asked James Sexton a question and I listened to the episode. I don't think he really answered it. He did answer it. He did a whole episode. But I asked him the question, what do you think prevents people from recovering from betrayal as the betrayed spouse? What do you think of that question? What's your answer?
I think it's a little bit about what we've already spoken about in terms of not wanting to let go of the story that you have about your past and the story that you thought you had or predicted for the future.
It almost
and it's
sounds
actually
like
the story about the future that I think is the hardest one to let go of.
Yeah.
You know, I could think about it. If I think about my own narrative, and I think about sometimes when I tell my story, there's a thing I always say, and I started saying it very early on, and I didn't really notice it, but I've noticed it more recently. And that is one of the things I say is, at that particular point when I moved out of the family home, and I came and I went back to my mum's house. That was the only place really available to me at the time financially, and I remember thinking to myself, I thought I knew what the next 5 to 10 years looked like. And now I don't know what tomorrow looks like. And that was it. Like to begin with, that was terrifying. That was the thing that held me back because there was so much uncertainty about what came next and such a lack of control or perception of a lack of control. It wasn't a lack of control, it's a perception. I believe you have that rug pulled from underneath your feet and it feels like you've lost all control. So you kind of for anything that resembles control, but you can't find it. So it's terrifying. But I think it's useful for anybody listening that the thing that really changed my perspective on that, rather than it being this blank canvas, which was terrifying to me because what the hell do I do? I realized that I could pick up the pen or I could pick up the paintbrush and I could create and paint my own future, paint my own path. And once I sat into that, I realized that I could pretty much create whatever it was I wanted. And I did. Is it your turn now?
Hold on.
Okay.
That I just want to share that I think the thing that prevents someone who has experienced infidelity in the role of the betrayed is the refusal to grieve. It's the refusal to come to terms with the loss of predictability. And I feel like when you look in hindsight, you realize you actually, just because you could predict what the next day was back then, doesn't mean that you were some mastermind who was capable of predicting the future. It just happened to lay out that way. It had nothing to do with your projections of the future.
No, of course not.
And
you can never predict what happens next.
Yeah, it would be cool if we could.
It would be useful
I'd get a lot more prepared. Just be a lot more prepared.
I would have got my kit together, like a good Girl Guide or a Boy Scout or something.
All right. Let's hear what you have to tell me.
Okay.
Tell me about me, Luke. Actually, you tell me what the stereotypes say about me, and I'll tell you whether that was true for me at the time or not.
If you are the other woman in your relationship and you love this podcast, you would love the Other Women community. The Other Women community is a membership program designed to help other women just like you reclaim their relationship with themselves and heal from their affair. We provide a safe and supportive environment for you to open up and talk about your experiences. We give you the tools and resources you need to grow into an authentic, empowered individual. If you're ready to take the next step in your healing journey, head on over to theotherwomanandthewife.com/community to learn more about the membership and all it has to offer. All right, let's jump back into the episode.
Okay, so selfish or immoral, seen as inherently bad, dishonest or lacking empathy.
Oh my God, definitely. I thought that was true about me for a really long time because of the choice to cheat, but mostly because of social narratives. When I took stock in my own life and I actually looked at all of the decisions I was making, I no longer saw them as selfish. I was like, oh shit, we're in a world where everybody else is leading my choices for me. So it's like what you said earlier. You were like, her choice to cheat was not about me. I hate the phrase "they cheated on me" because it takes all of the power and control outside of you. And I really like to frame it in the sense of, because it places the autonomy where it belongs, which is, I chose to participate in an extramarital affair. They chose to participate in an extramarital affair. The cheated on me is inclusive of the betrayed spouse, which kind of centers the choice around the betrayed spouse, which I don't think is true. I think that you can talk about the relationship and how the betrayed spouse played a part in it, but I don't agree that the stereotype that people who cheat are inherently bad or immoral or selfish. I think that they lack the ability to use their voice. Like, I certainly thought if I had voiced what I actually thought, I would be burned at the stake. It still
do you
hasn't
think you
happened.
cheated on, in that case, then, do you think you cheated on your own belief?
Oh, I think that I betrayed a belief system that I wanted to believe to harness security in the relationships that were important to me.
Is that you retrospectively dancing around it now? I'm thinking like more perspective, like at the time, because presumably at the time you weren't as aware that you were cheating a belief that was not really yours.
I had no idea what an intrinsic value or belief system was. Had no idea. I thought that you got to come into this world and you would inherit it from someone. Someone would tell you what it was, right? But like, again, that is the external world telling me who I am, what I believe, what I value. It's not me doing the deep dive and figuring out, okay, based on all of the experiences I've had so far, like, what do I actually believe? Which social conditioning has quite a bit to play in that.
Yeah, it does. And I think the biggest thing it has to explain for itself is the fact that it teaches us not to double check our own beliefs, regardless of what they are.
Yes.
Because we're always going to be influenced by the things around us. That's impossible not to be the case. We are literally not able or capable or have the awareness level probably until we're, I don't know, maybe in our teens, really, or maybe that's a little bit harsh, but 8 years old or something before we can even begin to really start to truly make sense and start to separate ourselves we start to think of ourselves as a self properly, like, and we're connecting with other people in relationships. And it's funny you say. So it's almost like you've come out of the delivery room at the hospital and you're supposed to be handed an instruction manual. It's like, okay, this is how this one works. This is how the world works. We read it and of course it's not quite as simple as that.
No, and it's like, even bringing up the instruction manual, I know I've brought this up to you before, but constantly looking outside of other people to learn how to treat.
Which is hilarious because they're looking at you.
Yeah, it is hilarious. And I always think about how sleep training with babies was such a learning curve for me, because I was like, why the fuck isn't this program working? They told me that this was the number one program to get my kid to go to sleep. And I was just victim to marketing of a product that didn't have much value in it. And then once I realized that if I just paid a little bit more attention to what was actually happening, I could respond differently and create an environment that actually fostered what was meaningful and valuable to my child or whatever I was learning at the time. It was way more of a productive approach than gathering somebody else's insight on, now you do 2 hours and 4 hours. And if you go on a date night every night, like, if we relate this back to relationships, everyone's, oh, just communicate. I'm like, what if these are incompatible communicators?
Do you think that's true?
What about that?
Do you think there are incompatible communicators?
There absolutely are. Are you kidding me? I'll say that the silent marriage is made up of the silent and miserable marriage. It's not a peaceful one. Everybody thinks it's peaceful because nobody's arguing. But I'm like, that doesn't mean that it's peaceful. It means that it's quiet.
Yeah.
And they have nothing really to talk about. They have nothing to exchange with one another.
I'm always amazed when people still tell me, I hear it all the time, we never argue. It's like, what a strange thing to start with.
Fabulous.
What a strange thing to lead with.
Yeah.
Like that. Oh, right. That's a measure of a good marriage. Yeah. Or a good relationship. And I'm not saying that we should be like shouting our heads off at each other all the time, because I think conflict's incredibly healthy, providing it's dealt with properly, providing it's processed and understood, and you're actually prepared to just pause for a moment and try and consider the other person's perspective. You don't have to even agree. But if all you're going to do is like build a wall between you to the point where you can't even see each other anymore, and the only way to communicate is by throwing stones and rocks at each other, then anyway.
And also, let's just clarify for the listeners, seeing someone is more than just visual It's more than visual. Seeing someone and being able to notice things about them and make them feel seen, that is truly seeing someone. I think it's I saw them. We're just ships passing through the fucking night. I see them every day. That's not seeing someone. That's just, I don't know what that is, really. What is that?
No, I don't know what that is.
And where you got anything clever to chime in here? What is it whenever somebody...
I think it comes back to that when you're autopiloting through life and you just turn that on to the marriage as well. Like when you're so dissatisfied with other aspects of your life that you just never come out of that headspace with the relationship. And then you really are
dawned on me. Coexistence.
You're
coexisting.
coexisting.
Do you think
and your relationship just gets sucked
sorry.
into it because you're not aware you're doing it.
Do you think some of it is home and in your relationships like a safe and comfortable place? Like it's a place where you can relax. It's where you can let your hair down, metaphorically. You can just not have to really worry. It's like you sigh as you walk through the door. It's like, oh, that's it. I can calm and relax into it. And maybe you've spent all your time at work or doing what it is in your day being very attentive and very switched on. And you're able to remember people's names and pay attention and focus and structure and think logically and do all these things. And then when you get home, you just want to switch off. But of course, you're not just switching. The problem is you're also forgetting that there's a relationship that exists at home as well. You don't get to just turn off.
I
completely.
truly think that people don't know how to conserve their energy at work so that they have enough energy to participate inside the home when they do get home. Like, I'll never forget, like, I had one therapy session a while ago. This was back whenever I was working at Meta, and she was like, what is a productive workday for you? And I was like, you know. And she's like, well, what's happening whenever you get home? I'm like, I'm hungry, I'm thirsty, I'm tired. Do you ever take breaks? Do you ever get up? Do you ever go for a walk? I was like, no, there's too much work to be done. Yeah. Seems there's always work to be done, isn't there?
I deliver a workshop. Like an in-person workshop on boundaries. And I always start with sharing my story around my relationship with my last long-term job, which I worked for 10 years. I'm going to leave that on a cliffhanger and share it another time. But thrill seeker, lustful, portrayed as someone seeking excitement, novelty, or physical satisfaction.
No, as someone who just came back from Vegas and went to the Las Vegas Sphere, I don't know if you guys have seen it. I'm not really a thrill seeker. And I have an intense fear of heights. And I was the girl who fell on the escalator and was crawling up it because it was too steep for me. So I actually am very averse to thrills in many arenas of life.
What does secrecy feel like for you?
Secrecy feels like shame. Secrecy feels like I have to hide. Secrecy feels like trouble. It doesn't. Was there anything exciting about participating in an affair? The only thing that was exciting about participating in an affair was actually feeling things and not suppressing or invalidating them.
Yeah.
That was the only thrilling thing. It was because I was completely removed from, I'll say, my static element, my American white Christian culture. I was completely moved outside of that, and I was put into another place in the world that I had a lot of judgments of. And all of a sudden I realized, like, I didn't have to carry those with me. And so it was like I was free to be alive in a sense. And it really had nothing to do with the affair. It had everything to do with my surroundings.
Sure. Okay.
And the gathering of independence. But yeah, keep going.
Unhappy or neglected?
I think everybody else thought that about me. When I think about
were you happy and did you feel attended to?
At that point in my life?
Mm-hmm. In your relationship?
In the relationship?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I feel like the relationship, we really give the marriage so much focus whenever we talk about infidelity, don't we?
Stop touching the question.
Oh, God. In the relationship, I was okay. I was happy. And as far as neglected, like, no.
Okay.
It wasn't
What about, so rather than the relationship, what about within yourself?
Within myself, definitely. Absolutely neglected my own thoughts and my own feelings. And because I neglected those, it's not like I could give anybody else access to them. And then it was like when I saw another person express himself so genuinely and authentically, it was the moth to a flame type thing. Like, I want to be able to do that. Like, I want to be able to say what I really think and feel what I really feel and not judge myself for it type thing.
It's not actually on the list, but it has just brought something to my attention, something that I see a lot with some of the people that I work with, that, and this is not to devalue the relationship.
I know, shut up, Luke, keep going.
With your partner, but it is this, that the affair is as much, if not more, about how it makes you feel, what it represents to you, than it does the individual that you are having the affair with.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Like, I definitely, when I first started this whole venture, I remember being hyper focused on the fact that it wasn't him that made me come alive. Crossing his path definitely lit a flame, but he couldn't sustain that flame. I needed to.
Sure.
And like the other thing that it brought up, I'm surprised you didn't say it, but it was character envy.
Okay.
Yeah, this bold attitude, this force to be reckoned with in the world. I want me some of that. And it's not that I wanted that for myself. And being acquainted with him didn't give that to me for myself. It just gave me an example.
Yeah.
You know?
I do.
Okay, what's
I
next?
think I can't imagine this one fitting you, but I might be wrong, sorry. Commitment phobic, labeled as somebody who struggles with monogamy or avoids long-term responsibility.
I think it's so strange because I was never really commitment phobic. I think what happened after the affair was I became afraid that I wasn't capable of making commitments because of the stereotypes' existence. But again, when I did that deep dive thing, I'm not afraid of making commitments. And I'm not afraid of, absolutely not.
So you didn't become commitment phobic until
the stereotype, basically, I started to embody it after the fact because the stereotype exists.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. And then finally on this list is master manipulator, stereotyped as someone who lies easily and manages a double life skillfully.
I wish it were true. I wish it were fucking true. I think that I could have blown this business up a lot faster if it were. I think all throughout my life, I've lived in fear of using my own power against somebody else. And I think ultimately that's what manipulation is. You believe that you have more power than somebody else and you use that to your advantage.
I wonder if it's maybe more that you fear that other people have more power than you do.
I think that makes you easy to manipulate. I don't think that makes you a manipulator.
No, that's true. No, yeah, actually, you're right.
Because I think that if you allow yourself to believe that somebody else is more capable of bringing you happiness than you are allowing yourself the opportunity to be manipulated by somebody else. But I remember it's so weird that one pops up because at the end of my, little sign-off letter to which I hate calling him my ex-husband. I prefer to call him my first husband. My little sign-off was like, I fear I manipulated you into marrying me. And now I look back at that and I'm like, that statement revokes all of his power.
Yeah.
It totally revokes his power.
Yeah.
And realizing that everybody made choices. Everybody made choices. And the outcome wasn't necessarily what we had planned for. But it doesn't mean that it was bad.
No.
Like,
So I have
that's
one final
what he-
question.
Okay, what?
My final question is, what do you now think about stereotypes when it comes to infidelity?
I think that stereotypes become embodied by the person who is paying more attention to social narratives than paying attention to who they truly are.
Okay.
I think it hinders people from actually discovering who they are and becoming who they're meant to be.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of putting it.
But I really struggle to say
you're
that.
really resistant. I know you're really resistant to it, which is why I asked the
I'm
question.
really resistant to it.
In fact, it's
Come
actually
on.
it's the level of resistance that makes me look. I know from me personally that when I find resistance in anything, it's got something to teach me. There's something that I've not resolved in my own mind around that situation. And it's always learning.
I know
always a
exactly
learning
what it is.
opportunity.
I refuse to believe that there's anybody who is incapable of change.
True, but a stereotype doesn't mean that people can't change. A stereotype is just a way of navigating them.
If you believe it about somebody, it only helps it come true.
That is, I think when you believe it about yourself, it only helps it come true. I think that's very true. And I think because you have a situation and then you label yourself, because even the stance that you take around stereotypes is a stereotype. And we can create a label for anything. And the labels don't really matter.
No, they
but it doesn't
don't.
mean they don't exist. And they can, and I think like anything, it can be a useful starting point. It's a bit like a foundational trying to make sense of something, but then not actually just acknowledging that doesn't define you and that you can step outside of any of those things, no matter what they are.
You don't think what you believe about somebody has power?
What I believe about somebody, what has power, what, over me or over you?
Over them.
Over them. I believe about you has power over you.
No, what you believe about somebody else has power over them and you. Like if I come into a conversation with a betrayed spouse and I believe that stereotypes are true, right? And then I'm immediately being like, oh, here comes the murderer, here comes the villain, right? Like I think that if we take a different approach and we say, okay, throw it out, throw the data out, you give somebody the opportunity to discover who they are. And
yeah, and I obviously I agree with that.
I guess
as soon as we,
I know what the word is that we're missing. Stereotypes can be accurate at times.
yes, I don't believe that stereotypes are a thing that defines an individual. But I think that
But if you say
people
that stereotypes
go
are
on,
true,
Anne-Marie,
right?
save us before I say
Okay,
something.
go.
No, I shouldn't
I want to
that.
say that in my opinion, I think of stereotypes in the same way I think of diagnoses. I think diagnoses are slightly different, but I think stereotypes are patterns that the human nature gets stuck in, and that's why they exist, and that's why they're real, and that's why they come to be. But I don't think that there's any real worth outside of addressing them as a pattern to putting them on people. And it's the same with diagnoses. You limit your ability to outgrow and move through a diagnosis of something.
It creates a confirmation bias, right?
By creating the confirmation bias. So I think stereotypes are the same. And where everybody comes to head with them is that, like, they're not useful unless you're discussing them like this, where you're like working through them. Because otherwise they can become really self-limiting. And then when society puts them on you, then you start limiting yourself.
I just think it's interesting. Again, I do find this really fascinating. I find it fascinating that both you and I have been through this list, and we've both essentially identified with probably at least 90% of these stereotypes, and yet now resistant to accept that they exist in. Now, I don't believe that they don't define an individual. And actually, I would suggest that anybody that, for example, I was trying to help through this situation, we would be doing the exact opposite of unpicking those stereotypes and recognizing that they are not helpful and they do not control you, they don't define you, they don't do any of those things. But to deny their existence in the context of just the fact the word even exists.
They only exist inside of your head, though, Luke.
Very true. Very true. But what doesn't exist inside our head? All of
The
reality
physical
exists inside our
reality?
head, Chelsea.
The
Whole of
physical
reality.
reality doesn't just exist inside of our head.
It might as well do, because if you weren't here and I weren't here, we wouldn't be able to witness it or experience it. So it doesn't matter.
I don't know.
It doesn't matter. If there's no observer, there is no thing, as far as we're concerned.
There's no observer. That was a fucking, there we go. We just leveled up everybody's awareness.
I like that we see things different. And it's like
It's very
Yeah.
fun talking with you about these
I
things.
think we've said enough.
And fucking Anne-Marie with the final say there. Well done.
Yeah, it was.
Oh, good.
Well, Pamry, you can edit my last bit of crap out if you want.
No. We're keeping
No, I
it all
think
in.
this
Yeah.
is going to be the dynamic, I think, in the moving forward here, where we take
I like
these
this.
opposite
I like
things
it
and
too.
we look at them.
I
under
like
a-
it. It
under
feels very
a
good
microscope.
and it's fun.
And it felt
it's-
natural too.
Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this podcast episode. We appreciate your support and would love to hear your thoughts on it. If you've made it this far, you're likely someone who is invested in the journey of being the other woman. We understand that this can be a difficult and complex experience, which is why we offer guided coaching to help you heal and move forward. We encourage you to explore the links in the episode description or visit theotherwomanandthewife.com/coaching to learn more about our exclusive coaching program and apply today. Thank you again for your support, and we look forward to seeing you in the next episode.